The notary stamped the last page, slid it across the table, and I signed my name the way I always have. Slow, deliberate, like I had all the time in the world. Because I did. For the first time in 41 years, I did. I had retired 3 weeks earlier from Hendricks County Public Works, where I'd spent the better part of my adult life managing road maintenance contracts. Not glamorous work. Not the kind of thing that earns you a plaque on a wall or a profile in a magazine. But it was honest, and it paid well, and I had saved carefully, the way my father taught me, the way men of his generation understood money. Quietly, steadily, without making a show of it. The cabin had been my wife Dorothy's idea, years before she passed. She used to clip photos from magazines and tuck them into a folder she kept in the nightstand drawer. Lake views, covered porches, wood-burning stoves. She never pushed. She just kept collecting those pictures like she believed someday we'd find the one. She passed in February of 2021. Pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I didn't do much of anything for about a year after that. I went to work. I came home. I sat in the kitchen with the lights off longer than I should have. But I kept her folder. In the spring of 2023, I drove up to Steuben County in northeastern Indiana, near the Michigan border, where the lakes are quiet and the towns still have hardware stores on Main Street. I spent 3 days looking at properties. On the 4th morning, I found it, a 2-bedroom A-frame on the eastern shore of a lake called Crooked Creek, set back in the pines, with a covered porch that faced the water and a wood-burning stove in the living room. I sat on that porch for 2 hours before I called the realtor back. I paid cash, $214,000. Every cent of it money I had earned and saved and kept and never once touched when times got lean. I signed the deed, shook the realtor's hand, and drove home with the windows down even though it was only 50 degrees outside. I felt for the first time since Dorothy died, like myself. My daughter Renee lives about 20 minutes from me in Brownsburg. She's 36, works in pharmaceutical sales, and married my son-in-law Clifton 9 years ago. Clifton sells software to hospital systems. He's good at it. He has the kind of confidence that fills a room before he does, the kind of voice that makes everything he says sound inevitable. I have never disliked Clifton exactly. I just have never fully trusted a man whose handshake is too firm on purpose. When I told Renee about the cabin, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Dad, that's a long drive for one person." "About 4 hours," I said. "I've done worse." "You're 67. I know how old I am." She didn't say anything else that night. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. 2 Sundays later, Renee and Clifton came for dinner. I made pot roast, the way Dorothy used to do it, chuck roast, carrots, potatoes, low and slow in the Dutch oven. I had just set the plates on the table when Clifton leaned back in his chair and said, in that boardroom voice of his, "We've been thinking about the cabin." I looked at him. "Have you?" "It's a significant asset, Dad." He had started calling me Dad about 4 years into the marriage. I never asked him to. "And with you living alone, we just want to make sure it's managed correctly." "It's a cabin," I said, "not a hedge fund." Renee put her hand on my arm. "We're just saying, what if something happened to you up there? You're hours from us. You're hours from a hospital." "I'm in good health." "You had a cardiac event in 2019, Clifton said. "I had an irregular heartbeat for 3 days. My cardiologist cleared me 8 months later." "Still," he picked up his fork, "we think it would make more sense if the property were put in a joint trust for your protection." I set down my knife, slowly, the way my father used to when he wanted you to understand that what came next was final. "The cabin is in my name," I said. "It stays in my name." Clifton smiled the way men like him smile when they think you're being foolish. "Of course, we're just thinking about the future." We finished dinner. They left. I washed the dishes and stood at the kitchen window for a long time, watching the dark. 3 weeks later, I drove up to the cabin for the first time as its owner. I brought groceries, my fishing gear, a box of Dorothy's photos that I'd been meaning to find a place for. I spent 4 days there. I fished in the mornings, read on the porch in the afternoons, cooked simple meals, and left the television off. I slept better than I had in years. When I got home, there was a certified letter in my mailbox. It was from an attorney, a man named Aldrich, with an office in Indianapolis. The letter stated that my daughter, acting out of concern for my welfare, had initiated a consultation regarding a petition for limited conservatorship, citing my advanced age, my history of cardiac irregularity, and my recent purchase of a remote property as evidence of potential impaired judgment. I read it twice. Then I set it on the kitchen table and made myself a cup of coffee. I am not a man who panics. I spent 4 decades managing construction sites and county contracts. I have sat across the table from people who wanted things from me and understood that the worst thing you can do in that moment is let them see you rattled. But I will tell you honestly, my hands weren't quite steady when I poured that coffee. I called my own attorney the next morning. His name is Walt Greer. I caught the name from a referral, a man I trust. No, wait. I need to be precise here. His name is Douglas Holt. He's been handling my estate planning for 11 years, out of an office on East Washington Street. I told him about the letter. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Sit tight, don't sign anything, don't respond to anything, and come see me Thursday." I went Thursday. Douglas walked me through what a conservatorship petition actually requires in Indiana. Clear and convincing evidence of incapacity, a court-appointed evaluator, a formal hearing, not a letter from a son-in-law's preferred attorney, not a cardiac record from 4 years ago, not the fact that I bought a lakeside cabin with my own money at an age when plenty of men are playing golf in Florida. They'd have to prove you can't manage your own affairs, Douglas said. Do you have any reason to believe a neutral evaluator would find that? None, I said. Then don't lose sleep over it. I tried not to. But the thing about being targeted by people you love, even people you love imperfectly, even people you've long since made peace with the limitations of, is that the wound isn't just legal. It sits differently. It wakes you up at 3 in the morning and makes you lie there replaying conversations, looking for the moment you missed. I replayed a lot of conversations that fall. Meanwhile, Renee called every few days. The calls were pleasant on the surface. How are you eating? Are you getting out? Have you seen Dr. Mays lately? But underneath them I could feel the architecture of something being constructed. Each question a measurement, each answer logged somewhere. In October, I drove back up to the cabin for a long weekend. I brought a toolbox this time. The porch railing needed reinforcing, and there was a section of the dock that had started to soften. I worked for most of Saturday, ate dinner on the porch, watching the sun go down over the water, and felt something settle in me that I hadn't realized had been unsettled. On Sunday morning, I drove into the nearest town, a place called Pleasant Lake, population about 900, and stopped at the hardware store for a few screws I'd run short of. The man behind the counter was maybe 75, with the kind of hands that have been useful their whole lives. We talked for a while. He asked if I was the one who'd bought the deal property on Crooked Creek. I said I was. He nodded like that was a good answer. Good piece of land, he said. Been empty too long. I drove back to the cabin feeling something I can only describe as rightful, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That was when Clifton escalated. I don't know what exactly triggered it. Whether the conservatorship consultation hadn't gone the way he hoped, or whether he'd decided to try a different angle. But in November, he showed up at my house on a Tuesday afternoon unannounced, while Renee was at a conference in Chicago. He knocked. I answered. He had a manila folder under his arm and the expression of a man delivering news he'd rehearsed. "Do you have a few minutes?" he said. I stepped back and let him in because he was my daughter's husband, and I am not a man who makes scenes on his own front porch. We sat in the living room. He opened the folder. Inside was a document, a proposed agreement, he called it, transferring management authority of the Crooked Creek property to a jointly held LLC, with Renee and Clifton listed as co-managers. I looked at it for a long moment. "Who drafted this?" I asked. "Aldrich drew it up. It's really just a formality. Protects you, protects the asset. It transfers control of my property to you and my daughter. Co-management. You'd still be listed as primary owner." "Listed," I said, "not functioning." He leaned forward. His voice dropped into that register he probably used to close deals, lower, more intimate, like he was letting you in on something. "Dad, we're worried about you. The cardiac history, the isolation up there, the amount you spent. It's a lot for one person to manage alone. We just want to help." I didn't ask for help. Sometimes people need it before they know they need it. I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about Dorothy. I thought about 41 years of work, of saving, of saying no to things so that later I could say yes to the right things. I thought about that porch facing the water. "Clifton," I said, "I'd like you to leave." He left the document on the coffee table. He said he hoped I'd take some time to think about it. He said Renee would be heartbroken if something happened to me, and there was nothing they could do. I waited until I heard his car back out of the driveway. Then I called Douglas Holt. "He left a document," I said. Douglas's voice was even. "Don't touch it. Take a photo of it where it sits, then set it aside, and come see me tomorrow." I photographed it. I went the next day. Douglas had already begun preparing the response to the conservatorship inquiry, a formal letter outlining my complete medical clearance, my professional history, my financial solvency, and the fact that purchasing a lakeside property with liquid savings is not, under any statute in the state of Indiana, evidence of diminished capacity. He also helped me do something else, something I had actually been thinking about for a while. Ever since I found Dorothy's folder and decided the cabin was the right thing to do, I updated my estate documents. Comprehensive, a revocable living trust in my name alone with clear successor trustee designations that had nothing to do with Clifton. A healthcare directive with my physician listed as primary contact. A durable power of attorney naming my younger brother Oscar. He lives in Columbus, Ohio. Calm as a February morning, the most sensible man I've ever known, as my agent in the event of genuine incapacity. Everything signed, notarized, filed. Then Douglas said something that I have thought about many times since. He said the best answer to people who claim you can't manage your affairs is to manage them exceptionally well, in writing, witnessed, and on record. I had one more thing to do. I drove to the Steuben County Recorder's office and pulled the deed to the Crooked Creek property. I had Douglas prepare a recorded affidavit of ownership, cross-referenced with the trust documentation, leaving no ambiguity about what the property was, who owned it, and under what terms it could or could not be transferred. I made a certified copy. I put it in a fireproof document sleeve, the kind you can get at any office supply store, bright orange, rated to 1500 degrees, and I put that sleeve in the glove compartment of my truck. Not because I thought I'd need it at a traffic stop, but because I'd drive up to that cabin regularly, and I wanted it with me, and I wanted it to be the first thing anyone found if they ever went looking. I didn't tell Renee or Clifton what I'd done. I went about my life. I made my follow-up cardiology appointment. I had dinner with Oscar when he passed through town in December. I drove up to the cabin for Christmas, cut a tree from the property line, decorated it with ornaments I brought from home, some of them Dorothy's, and spent Christmas Eve reading by the wood stove with a glass of bourbon and no television. It was the best Christmas I had had in years. January came. I got a call from Douglas. The conservatorship inquiry had been formally declined by the court. Insufficient grounds. The evaluator, A court-appointed clinical psychologist named Dr. Tav Adler had conducted a phone screening with me, and Douglas relayed, noted in her report that I was articulate, oriented, financially literate, and demonstrated no indicators of impaired judgment. I thanked Douglas and hung up. Then I sat at the kitchen table in the same chair where I had read that first certified letter, and I let myself feel the full weight of what had just passed. Not triumph exactly. Not relief either, though there was some of that. It was more like the feeling after a long storm. The quiet after, when you walk outside and see the damage and realize your house still stands. I called Renee that evening. I had decided to be straightforward with her, because she is my daughter, and I have tried my whole life not to let what is difficult between us become permanent. I know what you and Clifton have been trying to do, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We were worried about you, Dad." I know you were, but there's a difference between being worried about someone and trying to take legal authority over their life. The cabin, you spent so much. It's my money, Renee. I earned it, I saved it, and I spent it on something that makes me happy for the first time since your mother died. My voice was steady. I had practiced being steady. I am not impaired. I am not isolated. I am a 67-year-old man who is, for the first time in a long time, living the life I worked for. Another silence. Clifton thought. I know what Clifton thought. Clifton was raw. She didn't say anything for a while. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. "I'm sorry, Dad. I think I let him talk me into something that wasn't right." "I think so, too." We talked for another hour, not about the cabin or the lawyers or the documents, about her mother, about when Renee was small and Dorothy used to take her to the lake, a different lake, a state park in Brown County, and how Renee used to collect rocks from the shoreline and carry them home in her pockets. "I still have some of them," she said. "I know you do," I said. "Your mother kept a few too." When we hung up, I sat in the quiet for a while. 3 weeks later, Renee drove up to the cabin alone. She brought a casserole dish and a bottle of wine. We sat on the covered porch in our coats because the temperature had dropped back into the 30s, and we watched the lake, and she said, "I can see why you love it here." "Your mother would have loved it," I said. "Yeah," she said, "she really would have." We didn't talk about Clifton. That conversation, I suspected, would come in its own time, or it wouldn't. There are things you cannot make happen faster than they're ready to happen. I have learned that over 67 years. What I know for certain is this. I sat on that porch with my daughter in the cold January air, drinking wine I would never have bought for myself because it seemed too expensive, looking out at the lake that was mine, that I had chosen, that no one had the authority or the right to take from me, and I felt like a man who had made all the right decisions. The deed is still in the glove compartment, the trust is filed and on record. Oscar has the contact number for Douglas Holt saved in his phone. And every time I pull into the gravel drive at Crooked Creek, every time I step up onto that porch and hear the pines and see the water through the trees, I think of Dorothy and her folder full of clippings, and how she never stopped believing we'd find the right place. We found it, it just took me a little longer than either of us expected. I think about the moment Clifton sat across from me in my own living room, folder open on the coffee table, and said, "Sometimes people need help before they know they need it." He believed that. I could see it in the way he sat. Relaxed, certain. The way a man sits when he thinks the outcome is already settled. And maybe that's the part that stayed with me longest. Not the anger of it, but the confidence. The assumption that I was already a step behind, that the decision had already been made and my job was simply to agree. What Clifton didn't understand, what people like him rarely understand, is that quiet is not the same as unaware. I'd spent 41 years making decisions that held. Roads got built, contracts got honored, money got saved, not because I was loud about any of it, but because I was careful. because I thought before I moved. That's not something age takes away. In my experience, it's something age refines, if you let it. There's a kind of integrity that doesn't announce itself. It just shows up on record, notarized, filed with the county recorder's office. When Clifton finally understood what was in that glove compartment, not just a deed, but a complete legal architecture built to withstand exactly what he had tried, I don't think he felt defeated so much as he felt, for the first time, that he had been dealing with someone he had underestimated. That's a different kind of reckoning. I don't carry bitterness about what happened. I've tried to be honest with myself about why. Because bitterness would mean I believed, on some level, that they almost won, and they never came close. Not because I was lucky, but because I had done the work. The trust was in place. The attorney knew the full picture. Oscar had the emergency contacts. Every piece was where it needed to be, long before Clifton knocked on my door with his folder. That's the thing I want to say clearly, because I think it matters. The people who come for what you've built are rarely smarter than you. They're usually just counting on you to be unprepared. The best answer to that is not confrontation. It's readiness. It's having done the right things quietly, in advance, so that when the moment comes, you don't have to scramble. You just open a compartment and let the paperwork speak. Renee and I are in a different place now. It's not all the way repaired. I don't know that it ever fully will be. But she drove up to the cabin in January and sat with me on the porch in the cold, and we talked about her mother, and that felt like something real, something worth protecting. I think about Dorothy and her folder of clippings, all those years of saving pictures of places we hadn't been yet. She never stopped believing the right place existed. She just kept the faith and let the future come. I found the cabin. I kept it, and I have the papers to prove it. That's enough.